What came out of this breakdown hits Steelers Nation in a way that fans can feel deep in their gut, because everything in this report exposes a pattern that has quietly shaped the team's identity for more than half a decade. When you take this full picture of what's been happening inside Pittsburgh, even across multiple offensive coordinators, different quarterbacks, new receivers, changes in personnel and philosophy, the one constant that keeps circling back isn't a player, isn't a scheme, and isn't some unlucky trend. It's the head coach. And that's where this story really begins, because the flaw outlined in this analysis isn't small, it isn't subtle, and it isn't something that can be brushed off as a bad week or rough season. It's a core element built directly into how Mike Tomlin runs this team, and it continues to cap the offense's ceiling year after year. So come in strong and smash that like button, because today the conversation is serious. This isn't about denying the things Tomlin does well. Fans already know he's a world-class motivator, a stabilizing force, someone players genuinely want to play for. His teams don't implode, don't quit, and don't leak. That's rare in the NFL. That's real. But the problem here is that even with all that stability, even with all that structure and all that locker room buy-in, the same offensive issue keeps surfacing no matter who calls plays or who lines up under center. Whether it was Kenny Pickett, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, or Mason Rudolph, the throwing map has looked identical for years, a visible avoidance of the intermediate and deep middle of the field. The tape doesn't lie. The passing charts don't lie. The habits don't lie. Every quarterback, every coordinator, every year, the ball simply does not go where modern NFL offenses do their best work. It's not just philosophical, it's strategic. When a team refuses to attack the deep and intermediate middle, defenses stop respecting that part of the field. Safeties sit wide, corners squat on out routes, underneath zones close instantly. Suddenly the windows shrink, the plays feel harder, and the offense looks slower than it actually is. Fans see it every Sunday, the offense living on the edges, praying for contested catches, begging for run-after-catch production that can't develop because nothing is stretching the structure of the defense. It isn't an accident, it's by design, because Tomlin's priority, according to this breakdown, is avoiding the area of the field where the most interceptions are thrown. The problem is that by eliminating that risk, you also eliminate the reward that keeps the best offenses explosive: shots over the middle, layered throws, deep crossers, posts, digs, rhythm-breaking timing routes. That's where Sean McVay lives, where Kyle Shanahan lives, where Ben Johnson burned the Steelers' defense just last week. That area is the engine of modern offense, and Pittsburgh simply refuses to enter it. And here's where things start to feel even more frustrating for fans, because the roster isn't built to play the style Tomlin insists on. The team moved away from George Pickens, one of the league's most dangerous sideline ball winners, and brought in DK Metcalf, who has never been that type of player. His strength is run after catch, not contested catches in tight windows. Yet Pittsburgh continues forcing an offense that asks him to win in ways that don't fit his game. Then behind him, the receiver room is filled with burners, true 4.3 athletes who thrive on in-breaking routes, crossers, slants, posts, and plays that let them outrun leverage. But they're being used like boundary specialists instead of space players. Meanwhile, Pat Freiermuth, a natural zone softener and middle field threat, is barely featured compared to tight ends with far less receiving upside. Everything feels mismatched, a roster designed for one style trapped inside a philosophy built for another. Even Arthur Smith, whose entire identity in Tennessee revolved around maximizing in-breaking routes and using the middle of the field to elevate A.J. Brown into a superstar, has abandoned those concepts in Pittsburgh. And not because he forgot how to call them, but because the head coach doesn't want passes thrown there. That's the common denominator. That's the through line that's carried from Matt Canada to Eddie Faulkner to Smith, from Pickett to Fields to Wilson to Rodgers to Rudolph. One voice sits above them all, shaping the offense through avoidance rather than aggression. And this raises a question that fans have been whispering for years but are now saying louder. If the offensive struggles are consistent across every coordinator and every quarterback, how much of it is actually the coordinator's fault? How much belongs to the person overseeing the philosophy rather than the people executing it? So with the team stuck in this cycle, limited explosiveness, predictable structure, mismatched personnel, frustrated players, and an offense built to attack everything except the areas that could elevate it, the question becomes impossible to ignore. If this flaw has survived 5+ years, multiple coaching changes, and roster overhauls, is it even fixable as long as the same person is controlling the philosophy? And that brings us right to you, because before we go deeper into what this could mean for the future, I want to know what Steelers Nation honestly thinks. Based on everything laid out here, do you believe this offensive limitation is something Mike Tomlin can change? Or is it simply who he is as a coach? Picking up right where we left off. Because once you see how deep this issue runs, the conversation shifts from can he change? to what happens if he doesn't, and that's where the weight of this entire situation really hits Steelers fans. Because the problem isn't just the philosophy itself, it's the consequences that ripple out from it. When an offense is constructed to attack the middle of the field but is forbidden from doing so, it fractures everything from player development to roster value to the team's ability to evaluate its own talent. You can see it clearly with the receivers. This room is built for separation and speed. Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin, DK Metcalf, all guys who thrive when catching the ball on the move. Slants, posts, deep crossers, and in-breakers are supposed to be the bread and butter of players with that profile. But instead of allowing them to use that burst to create natural windows, they're being forced into out routes, curls, and straight-line sideline stems that eliminate their greatest advantage. So when fans look at the stat sheet and wonder why this receiver group isn't producing, the answer isn't talent. It's usage. It's the system limiting them to the smallest, tightest areas of the field while the most valuable space, the middle, stays untouched. Then you shift to the quarterback position, and the pattern becomes even more telling. It didn't matter whether it was a young prospect like Kenny Pickett, a mobile creator like Justin Fields, a veteran like Russell Wilson, an improviser like Mason Rudolph, or a Hall of Famer like Aaron Rodgers. Every single one of them produced the same passing chart under this structure. And when 5 quarterbacks with completely different skill sets all end up operating the same way, the only logical explanation is that they're being told exactly where not to throw. That isn't coincidence. That's instruction. And when a philosophy becomes so rigid that it suppresses the strengths of multiple coordinators, you start looking at the bigger picture. Arthur Smith didn't suddenly forget how he turned A.J. Brown into one of the most dangerous in-breaker receivers in the league. He didn't accidentally stop running play-action middle shots, crossers, and layered digs. He adapted to what his head coach demands. The same happened with Matt Canada. The same with Eddie Faulkner. The same with every quarterback room the Steelers have cycled through. The middle stays off limits, and so does any real offensive evolution. This is where the organization faces a crossroads that isn't just philosophical, but structural. Because even if the Steelers want to lean into a new era, a new quarterback, a revamped defense, younger weapons with elite speed, none of that matters if the underlying philosophy doesn't change. It's like buying a sports car and never taking it out of second gear. You can add new pieces. You can rearrange the staff. You can replace personnel. But if the play calling radius stays limited, so does the ceiling of the entire team. And that leads us to the looming question that's beginning to echo louder not just from fans, but from analysts, former players, and even national media. If Mike Tomlin doesn't modernize, should the Steelers consider moving on? This breakdown outlines several scenarios, and the most realistic one doesn't involve a firing. It involves Tomlin stepping away, much like Sean Payton did in New Orleans, giving the Steelers an opportunity to trade his rights and recoup a premium draft pick. It preserves the franchise's tradition of never firing a head coach. It gives Tomlin control of his next destination, and it gives Pittsburgh the clean reset that would allow a new coach to finally realign the roster with a scheme that matches its strengths. But that's the future. Right now, Steelers fans are stuck watching an offense that feels cramped, predictable, and held back not by lack of talent but by a philosophy rooted in avoiding risk rather than pursuing reward. And when the core of that philosophy hasn't changed in over 5 years, even as the game evolves around it, it raises a direct, unavoidable question for the fan base. If Tomlin stays exactly the same, is this offense ever going to reach the potential the personnel clearly has? Picking up exactly where we left off, because this conversation about the Steelers' future doesn't slow down for anyone inside the building, and certainly not for the fans who've watched the same patterns repeat for years. When you zoom out and look at the big picture, it becomes clear that the situation is no longer about one season, one coordinator, or one set of players. It's about a structural ceiling the team keeps running into, a ceiling created not by the roster but by the philosophy guiding it. And that's why the stakes of this moment feel heavier than usual. When you look at the offense on paper, the ingredients are actually there for a modern, explosive system. You've got receivers who can run past anyone in the league. A tight end in Pat Freiermuth who's built to attack soft spots in zone and win in the intermediate middle. Running backs like Jalen Warren and Kenny Gainwell who provide dangerous yards after catch ability. And a coordinator in Arthur Smith who has proven he can engineer a top-tier play-action, middle-field-driven offense when he's allowed to run his system freely. All the pieces are in place, except the freedom to use them in the way they're meant to be used. And this is the part that frustrates fans most. The Steelers aren't missing the talent to open up this passing game. They're missing permission. They're missing a green light to throw where great offenses thrive. Because the moment Pittsburgh unlocks the middle of the field, everything else changes. Suddenly those fast receivers are catching the ball with momentum rather than having to win tough, stationary sideline battles. Suddenly the running game breathes because linebackers can't cheat toward the edges. Suddenly safeties have to stay honest, which opens up play-action shots and isolates receivers in single coverage. Suddenly the tight ends become matchup nightmares instead of afterthoughts. The entire structure of the offense shifts. The film even hints at it. The few times the Steelers have dared to hit a dig, a crosser, or a play-action glance route, the yardage comes easy. But that's the point. It only happens occasionally, and only as exceptions, never as identity. And that's why so many fans have reached the point where they're not just questioning execution, they're questioning direction. Because a philosophy that's this consistent across multiple quarterback eras, coordinator changes, and roster rebuilds reveals something simple but undeniable. The offense isn't failing on accident. It's failing on purpose. It's failing because the person at the top believes a certain way of playing football is safer, smarter, or less likely to result in turnovers. But the modern NFL doesn't reward safe. It rewards pressure, stress, and unpredictability. It rewards teams that force defenses to play on their heels, not the ones constantly trying to avoid disaster. And now Pittsburgh stands at a moment where they have to decide if they're willing to keep living with the ceiling this philosophy imposes, or whether it's time to break it, because the future is coming fast. A new quarterback could arrive. A revamped defensive identity could be built. A young, dynamic play caller could step in and reshape the team's DNA. But none of that matters unless the organization is truly ready to take its hands off the brakes and let the offense breathe in the parts of the field it's been avoiding for years. And that's what makes this offseason feel like a turning point. If nothing changes, if this exact structure continues, then fans already know how the story ends. 9 wins, maybe a playoff appearance, maybe a one-and-done, and another year of wondering what could have been if the offense wasn't stuck operating inside a shrinking box. But if the organization is willing to reset, whether through a new philosophy, new leadership, or even a new era entirely, then the Steelers could finally move into a version of themselves that matches the talent they've already assembled. So here's the real question as we wrap up this continuation. With all the evidence laid out, all the patterns identified, and all the limitations exposed, do you think this offense can evolve under Mike Tomlin, or is a true reset the only way this team reaches its full potential? What makes this moment so defining for the Steelers isn't just the frustration of another season stuck in the same offensive loop, it's the realization that the organization is running out of places to hide from the truth. For years, fans blamed the OC, then blamed the quarterback, then blamed the offensive line, then said the talent at receiver wasn't enough. But when 5 quarterbacks with different strengths all end up playing the exact same restricted brand of football, when multiple coordinators all fall into the same patterns regardless of their background, and when even veteran stars begin to resemble diminished versions of themselves inside this structure, the conversation shifts. It shifts away from the excuses and toward the foundation beneath the entire operation. And that's why the possibility of a separation between the Steelers and Mike Tomlin feels more real now than it ever has. Not because of one bad year, not because of one ugly loss, but because this flaw, this refusal to attack the most valuable part of the field, has created a ceiling that even Tomlin's strengths can't lift the team above anymore. The breakdown we've been following makes it clear. The only era of his tenure when Pittsburgh truly threatened championships was when the offense had a coordinator who pushed the ball vertically, who attacked space, who didn't coach scared. And ever since that identity vanished, the Steelers have become the definition of predictable, good enough to survive, but never built to strike. The most revealing part of all this is how much the landscape has changed around Pittsburgh while Pittsburgh has stayed still. The AFC has evolved. Opponents have evolved. Offensive football has evolved. Defenses have evolved. Yet the Steelers' offensive philosophy, the one written into the DNA of the team by its head coach, has not. And when the league speeds up while an organization resists adaptation, the gap only widens. That's not pessimism. That's the reality reflected in 5 years of tape, 5 years of charts, and 5 years of offenses that look suffocated by something far bigger than one bad play call. So now the question becomes unavoidable. If this team is preparing to draft a new quarterback in the near future, preparing to rebuild portions of the roster, preparing to reshape the offense with new weapons and new speed, can they really hand that future to a philosophy that has proven unwilling to evolve? Or does the organization need a clean slate, the kind of reset that gives the next quarterback, the next coordinator, and the next core of young players a chance to grow in an offense that uses the full field, not half of it? And the truth is, the most realistic door out of this cycle is the one the report hinted at: Tomlin choosing to step away on his own terms, not fired, not thrown under the bus, but stepping aside the same way Sean Payton did, allowing the Steelers to honor their tradition, maintain their dignity, collect draft compensation, and start fresh without fracturing the relationship with a coach who has earned the respect of the city. It's the only scenario where everybody wins. Tomlin preserves his legacy. Pittsburgh gets a first-round pick. A new era begins without bitterness, and the offense can finally be built around the strengths it already has instead of the limitations it keeps being forced into. Because one thing is undeniable, this roster is too fast, too dynamic, and too explosive to keep living inside a passing attack that treats the middle of the field like a danger zone instead of an opportunity zone. And if that philosophy doesn't change, if the structure doesn't shift, then every quarterback who walks through that door will face the same fate as the last five, a restricted system designed to survive, not succeed. So as we close this breakdown, and as Steelers Nation looks ahead to what could be the most defining offseason of the Tomlin era, the question that matters most isn't about the record, or the standings, or even the stats. It's this: do you think the Steelers can reach a championship ceiling without a philosophical overhaul, or is a new era the only path forward? Picking up right where the last section left off, because this conversation inside Pittsburgh doesn't just disappear, it grows heavier the more you look at what the tape, the trends, and the patterns reveal. And the truth is, once you recognize how deeply rooted this offensive restriction is, you can't unsee it. It becomes impossible to separate the team's inconsistencies from the philosophy that shapes every snap they take. And that's why, even without adding anything beyond what this breakdown already documented, the implications feel massive. Because if the biggest limitation on the offense isn't talent, and isn't the coordinator, and isn't the quarterback room, then what the Steelers have been dealing with isn't a temporary issue, it's structural. It's woven into the way Mike Tomlin wants football to be played. And when a head coach's central belief clashes with the way the modern NFL functions, the organization eventually reaches a collision point. The report lays it out plainly. The Steelers have spent years constructing offenses that never align with the philosophy Tomlin insists on. If you're going to avoid the middle of the field, you need